Welcome to the Lapin Assessment. I'm very pleased to have Joseph Nickel on my balcony as always, but we have stepped up our filming efforts, Joe. You can see that we are stepping up our attempts to get two angles into this podcast, and we hope that all will go well. I'm doing all of the technical work here and learning as I go, and you are my partner in this project, so let's hope that this stepped up visual capability will also find favor with our viewers. Joseph, before I get into anything else, I want to ask you what's on your mind. There are lots of things going on, and I specifically want to do some freewheeling.
Sure.
And to figure out what's on your mind right now. What stands out to you? What's on your radar?
Well, I would say my mind, more so in the past 2 years, has been more at ease because of the situation with the war. It feels like the beginning of the end or something. I don't want to be cliche here, but since the living hostages came home, there are still 16 bodies in Gaza, and the families need to have them returned also so they can have a proper burial. But I think everyone's feeling this in the country. You can feel it in the air that it's easier to breathe.
Sure.
You know, the living hostages, they endured hell for 2 years, the ones that were just released now. But they're back. So there's like this really kind of profound sense of relief in the air. Do you feel that as well?
Of course, it's unmistakable. But, at the same time, it also makes me a little bit uneasy for different reasons. I have huge relief over the fact that every living hostage has been released by the Hamas terrorist organization and its various terrorist allies in Gaza. I have huge relief that this crisis in Israeli society is over. I think we were all at the stage, at the emotional level where we felt bad. I felt bad about everything I did because in the back of your mind, that we have some, brother in Gaza, a member of our people who's in a dungeon, who's in hell. So, when you go out, you do something nice. Nobody really enjoyed it fully. Everybody had this at the back of their mind. So,
and you can see that. I just want to give you a little anecdote. By day I work in high tech, and in high tech, there's a tendency to always have all sorts of toasts and fun hours and happy hours and this kind of thing. And whenever that we had one of those, a happy hour, there'd be a somber moment at the beginning, and there'd be a somber cloud over it. And we would acknowledge, whoever was making the toast would always acknowledge, this is to health, this is to our productivity, and of course the return of the hostages. So no one ever forgot in these 2 years. They were always at the forefront of everyone's minds, and it's just really, it was a national experience. Everyone, felt some kind of connection because they're just people.
It could have happened to any of us.
Could have happened to anyone. Our brothers, sisters, friends, children. So really, it was a difficult 2 years because of that and other things. But yeah,
definitely. Now the other thing is that this issue also tore Israeli society apart. Yeah. The price that Israel should pay for their release, and I think it's worth pointing out that this deal is better than almost anybody thought was possible. Okay, the fact that every living hostage was released, and the IDF is in charge of more than 50% of the Gaza Strip. It's a game changer. It's an incredible achievement. Nobody thought it was possible, and the reason that it's so critical is because until that moment, the conventional wisdom was that Israel has to withdraw to the perimeter, which is barely a kilometer wide. And basically, any Hamas cell with an anti-tank missile would be able to not even cross the perimeter with some of these missiles, and they could already hit homes in the western Negev. And so the fact that the IDF is in control deep into Gaza, in control of the Philadelphia corridor, we'll get into this a little bit later, and Hamas still released every hostage is an absolutely incredible achievement. And it was done because of a combination of things. I'll just quickly say that the fact that the IDF was closing in on Gaza City, which was the last stronghold, helped Hamas understand that the hostages are no longer an asset or an insurance policy, but actually exactly the opposite. The strike in Qatar and the Hamas leadership rattled the Qataris. Then the Trump administration's diplomacy via Kushner and Witkoff and Rubio and lots of others, and they were basically able to take Hamas's backers, Turkey and Qatar, and turn them into pressure levers on Hamas. Also, very unexpected achievement. Lots of things just came together for this incredible achievement. So now the reason I'm uneasy is because everybody thinks that the mission is accomplished and the war is over.
Right.
And
I just want to say, I just want to say before you get into it too deep,
I will.
I'm under no illusions. I know Hamas hasn't disappeared. I know that probably the next round is brewing on the horizon. I just want to put that. I'm under no illusions, but I'm feeling relief.
Sure. And I didn't think you were under any illusions at all, but I think other people are. And really, the thing I would say is to people, both in Israel and outside, is that this war and our strategic situation cannot exclusively be measured by the situation of the hostages. And the fact that a lot of people chose to do this, I think, is a result of populist messaging. It was the result of very shallow thinking. We are in a fight for our existence here, and there are so many factors to measure. And so, of course, at a human level, the hostages, huge relief, but they were used also to extort this society and tear it apart, this issue. And it's just wrong to measure our strategic situation exclusively by this issue. And unfortunately, this has become all too prevalent. So I'm putting that as an asterisk, as a sort of...
You mean when good and bad?
Exactly.
Right? Like now the hostages are back, and everyone's really, thinking things are all good.
Exactly.
But when things were... Yeah, I see what you mean.
The media discussion, not all media outlets, but some, is just so shallow that the only measurement they have of our strategic situation is the situation of the hostages. And that is simply wrong. It's just wrong. There are so many other important markers like enemy capabilities, which is the main thing to watch out for. We're going to get into that a little bit later. But I actually want to pivot away right now from the strategic and the military stuff. We'll come back to it because there's so much happening at the diplomatic, cultural, and political levels. And I know you've had your eye on a lot of balls in the air. There's a lot of a lot of balls to juggle. And I'm going to ask you to just list the things that you've seen. And just before you start, I think it's worth mentioning that it seems to me that there's a big section in the world of anti-Israel activists, both Islamists and far leftists, and also far rightists, who seem very disappointed at what has happened, at Israel's achievement, at America's achievement here, at the fact that Hamas had to agree to something it didn't want to agree to, that there's a ceasefire. They seem very disappointed, and we seem to be seeing a lot of fallout from that. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Joseph. What's happening in the world?
Sure. That's a good setup. So let's start unpacking that. So you use the word disappointment. Now it's a really peculiar word to use in this context when we're talking about a ceasefire and when we're talking about the end of hostilities. I mean, in Gaza, the end of the fighting as of now in Gaza. We'll see what happens in the future, like you said, but right now. So to use the word disappointment is strange. Now, I think it splits it. So it's a strange word to use, disappointment, because we're talking about the end of hostilities here and the end of the war that so many people were ostensibly protesting against, and everyone calling for a ceasefire. Okay, now we have a ceasefire. So why would there be disappointment? It's a weird thing, right?
Yeah.
And this is across. I mean, it's very, very deep, and it's across the board. Let me give you some examples. Amnesty International. It took them, I think, 4 days after the announcement of the ceasefire. It took them 4 days to make an announcement, to write or say anything about it on their social media.
Now let's just pause on that for a second. Amnesty International, which is an organization that's supposed to be about human rights, supposed to be about peace, supposed to be about reducing suffering in the world, right? That's their stated mission, more or less, if I get it right. And it took them 4 days to welcome a ceasefire in a searing, bloody conflict. Why?
So it's very weird. And all those things that you mentioned about the raison d'être of Amnesty, it's correct. But even more particularly, Amnesty is about hostages and political prisoners. Right? Like that's what it's really about. They're there to talk about hostages and political prisoners and to advocate for their release. Right? And we didn't, they didn't quite do this. They didn't fulfill their duties, let's say, with regard to the Israeli hostages throughout this conflict. But anyway, we'll put that off to the side for a sec. So why did it take them 4 days? Now, there's other examples all across the cultural landscape here. there's one organization called Artists for Ceasefire, and they have a large social media following on Instagram. I think they're based in the United States.
Okay.
Now, if you remember last year, about a year ago, they had this pin. The organization came out with the pin with a hand on it with the heart, and a lot of actors that went to the Oscars, they wore this pin with the heart. I think that's the organization behind that. I think they're called Artists for Ceasefire. Now, I checked almost a week after the ceasefire was announced. Now we're just over a week, and they hadn't released any statement. Artists for Ceasefire. I mean, that is their whole purpose of existing.
You know, it's
calling for a ceasefire.
It's a level of irony that would almost be comical if it wasn't so insane.
Right.
Because it's like Monty Python, Artists for Ceasefire. Your whole reason for existing is to promote a ceasefire.
Ceasefire. It could be within the last few days, within the last couple of days, they've released a statement on their social media. I haven't checked in the last couple of days, but when I checked, there was nothing.
You know what, to me, what this means, just to sort of put a headline on all of this, that whatever these people are motivated by, it's not what they say. We'll break with that. Yeah. I'm sure you have ideas about what they're really motivated by, but when the behavior is so divergent from the stated goal, that means that there's a lie that's being told about motivation, about goals, about worldviews. They use the language of human rights. They don't celebrate when something that's supposed to actually relieve the condition of people, millions of people on both sides of the border. They don't seem to...
you would expect a total outpouring of joy and relief.
It's not happening.
You would just a complete across the board outpouring of joy. And I mean, look at Israelis. Israelis were celebrating.
Exactly.
You look at scenes from Gaza.
By the way, Gazans also.
Exactly. You look at scenes from Gaza. So you have the people with the most skin in the game here are celebrating. Now, why aren't these people? And it's really, this is not a few isolated cases here.
Yeah.
There's really a general phenomenon here of lack of enthusiasm about the ceasefire. Now, some people... So, okay, I'll get to that in 1 second, but it's worth mentioning too that some people do, a lot of people say something, but begrudgingly. It's almost like you feel
like
that they're saying begrudgingly, like they'll say, yes, we got a ceasefire, but there's still apartheid and there's still genocide and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So you feel this kind of begrudging, sentiment.
All the propaganda talking points have to still...
Right. Exactly. Now, let's get to the question of why. It's a loaded question. As I see it, it kind of splits into two categories, okay? Part of the reason seems to be kind of an American political, kind of American partisan reason, right? Trump had a lot to do with the ceasefire. He had a lot to do with pushing it across the finish line. And a lot of these organizations are on the political left or aligned with political progressives, and they hate Trump. They really don't like Trump.
And they hate Israel.
They hate Trump and they hate Israel. And in terms of the American...
It's a success for Trump. It's an achievement for Israel. So they don't celebrate. Isn't that right?
Totally. Yeah, exactly. So they see Trump's name and signature is all over this. So very, very hard for them to give the credit.
They're actually bummed out about it, is what seems to be the case. And
it's very weird.
By the way, just before we started broadcasting, I saw a poll. I think it was published by Reuters and it was reported by I-24 in Hebrew. Stating, and the reporter was saying that while relations between Washington and Jerusalem are at their very best, absolute very best ever, the relations between the American people and Israel is far from being at its very best. And he released some figures, something like 69% of Americans who were questioned support the establishment of a Palestinian state. And then he juxtaposed the imminent election of Zohan Mamdani, who he characterized as basically a radical Shiite Muslim with an anti-Israel and anti-Zionist and implicit anti-Semitic agenda, who's about to become apparently the mayor of New York. So he's saying, split the screen. Sure, things between this administration and Israel are at their all-time best, and there's no denying that. But beneath the surface, there's trouble brewing. And this cultural cloud was troubling this reporter on I-24.
Right.
Now the thing is, I don't know if these polls how accurate they are, because in Europe you also have similar polls, and the European countries before this whole phase of the ceasefire they try to satisfy and appease their own Muslim communities as well as the left-wing elements in their countries by pushing for this Palestinian state. Let me just inject something from a military and strategic perspective.
Sure.
The establishment of a Palestinian state in our generation would be an act of suicide for Israel, absolute suicide, because it's clear that it would become a failed terror state at best. And at worst, Gaza was already basically a Palestinian state in many ways. Right. And the whole idea of ceding security control would basically enable jihadist armies to once again rise up on our border. So my personal view is we need to talk about options that are realistic. Palestinian autonomy is realistic. The Kurds have autonomous regions throughout the Middle East. No one in the Middle East seems to give a shit. They don't. They don't care. Nobody in the world, in the West, seems to care. The Kurds have autonomies. But when it comes to the Palestinians, there's this sort of messianic rallying call. They have to have a state now. Never mind that when they, the most autonomous they've gotten was used to create the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. So that's the reality check that I want to inject. But aside from that, I want to ask you, when we're talking about motivations, how do you map it out? What's the real underlying currents that you're seeing both online and in the West?
So going back just for a sec, going back to the question of why do people seem disappointed or not sufficiently joyful about the ceasefire? So I'm breaking it down into the reasons. One, we have the American partisan political aspect. I think that's actually the smaller. Under the surface, though, I think there's something darker here. And I think it's, and it's simple too. It's not complicated. It's that people are genuinely upset to see that Israel is kind of winning this war, has won this war, has achieved many of the achievements it set out. And this really gives you an insight into the mindset. It's not necessarily that they're pro-Palestinian in the sense that let's be pro-Palestinian and actually activate for what's in the best interest of the Palestinians, right? It's Palestinian if that means being anti-Israel.
Yep.
Right? It's what's her name? The researcher, Dr. Einat Wilf. She put it in a very interesting way. She said, Schrodinger's Palestine. Okay, now my interpretation, what she meant is you kind of have two Palestines that exist. One is the Western imagination Palestine, where, they want, the leadership, all the Palestinians are monolithic and they want the same thing as everybody else. They just want to live in peace, self-determination, prosperity, economic prosperity, whatever. And, that means living side by side Israel. We just have to stop the apartheid and all will be good. Yeah. That's the Western imagination Palestine. And then there's the Hamas Palestine.
Yeah.
Right. Which
is the real one.
Which is the real one because they have the control on the ground.
Exactly.
And they steer the ship. And that in that Palestine, there is no Israel.
Right.
It's just completely, this vision of Hamas is Israel doesn't exist at all.
Yeah.
So there's two Palestines here. And
do you think that there is an amalgamation between the jihadist vision of Hamas, because Hamas couldn't care less about Palestinian interests. What they care about is conducting a holy war to destroy the Jewish state. They view the existence of a Jewish state in this land to be an abomination to Islam.
Yeah.
That's their primary driving force. This explains, if people grasp that, they will grasp everything that Hamas has done since its founding in the 80s until now. And the far left in the West, the progressive left, latches on to that because it also has a problem with the Jewish state and it has a problem with the West in general. So they're anti-Western, they're anti the world's only Jewish state, and they have different ideologies, but they latch on to this specific rallying call, this war call, right?
Right.
And it seems that this disappointment comes from the fact that these ideologies have been shattered, right? Their vision has been taken 1,000 miles back from where it was on the eve of October 7th. You've got the Iranian regime that's licking its wounds. Hezbollah is a shadow of its former self. Hamas is surrounded on the ground by the IDF. So this is a failure. It's a failure of the jihad. and it's a failure of the progressive latching on of the jihad, right?
Right.
So what do they have left? They have their talking points. They have their, propaganda. I don't know. You follow this a lot closer than I do.
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, I would say kind of the prevalent attitude of a lot of them is, okay, we just have to keep going. We're not going, and we're going to keep going out on the streets. We're going to keep going. We're going to keep protesting. We're going to keep the genocide libel going. We're going to keep the apartheid libel going. And eventually it will all come crumbling down. Just have to keep going. Just another few terrorist attacks. They won't call them terrorist attacks, but just another few acts of resistance, and we just have to keep resisting. And don't worry, it's all the crumbling is imminent.
Right.
It's all going to come crumbling down. So there's a fundamental part of this whole geopolitical situation that's quite complex that they just don't grasp.
Yeah.
Right. They don't. First of all, they don't grasp the jihad aspect of this. I feel like is completely lost on them. If they acknowledge the problem, which is a massive problem of radical Islam, well, it's the fault of the West,
right,
in the first place for creating the conditions out of which emerged radical Islam and jihad and all this. But they're missing.
Does that include 9/11? Is that also the West?
Yeah, for sure. And you see some of even some of these more whatever. Some Western journalists. I'm trying to think of an example. Brianna Joy Gray, for example. Do you know who she is?
No.
She was on The Hill, which is a kind of centrist publication. Centrist. They have centrist center-left podcast.
Yeah.
And then she was on an interview with one of the hostages' sisters. She kind of rolled her eyes at her, and she's kind of a radical anyway. So then she was fired from The Hill. Maybe you remember. Anyway,
this. Yeah.
Her name is Brianna Joy Gray, and she, during that interview, the hostage's sister mentioned radical Islam and jihad, and she said, "Well, look, this is but Israel's creation and Israel's existence and the oppression that it caused is one of the reasons that Osama bin Laden cited for carrying out 9/11."
Right.
I mean, that's just an absurd thing to say, right? That we should,
It's absurd because the idea that these ideologies need an excuse and that if it didn't happen, then they wouldn't act is a fundamental act of deception. I think it's really, and I think, you mentioned they don't know or they don't talk about the jihad. I think they're hiding the jihad, at least the elites, the elite opinion progressive. I think they know all about what jihad is, and they are sweeping it under the carpet because it's very inconvenient. It's the elephant in the room. The idea of religious fundamentalist, barbaric holy war for a medieval vision of a caliphate, which is the end goal of Hamas, ISIS, Al Qaeda, all the Muslim Brotherhood, which Qatar is a major backer of, and Turkey. If they all have a vision of a caliphate, they just argue amongst themselves about how to get there.
Right.
I think the progressive
good thing they do argue also.
Yeah, for sure. I think the elites, of the progressive world are basically aware of this and are covering it up. We're covering it up because and they do this through the tactics that you described.
It's a lot of gaslighting, and sometimes it's so blatant. I think it was just a couple months after October 7th, one of these student organizations, now I think it was Students for Justice in Palestine, they projected a series of messages onto a library. I forget exactly, maybe Washington University. I forget exactly which university, but they projected a series of messages, and one of them was "Glory to our martyrs."
Right.
I mean, this language is taken kind of right from the language of jihadists. Yeah. Right. The martyrs.
Which organization was this?
I think it was Students for Justice in Palestine.
Yeah.
I wrote about this back then. I can send you the article.
Wasn't this organization founded by somebody who has links to the Muslim Brotherhood? I believe.
Yeah. If it was the Students for Justice in Palestine, and we always get hung up on this name. I remember last time.
I think it's them. They have branches all over North America. And they have links to the Muslim Brotherhood, and they take Muslim Brotherhood talking points.
Right.
So,
but they're ostensibly, they have branches all over America, all over universities. They're ostensibly a progressive organization.
Yeah.
Right. It's students. They're based in universities. That's where their chapters are. So it's this ostensibly progressive organization. So there you go again. You have this disguise, kind of gaslighting, right? And now what's the excuse, right? To say, well, glory to our martyrs. It's not no, that's not a jihad type slang. Oh, no, it's just a pure coincidence that jihadists say it. We don't mean that, though.
Right.
We don't mean, violence. Or what's the other one? Now, years ago, way before October 7th, you had that one activist, I think her name is Linda Sarsour.
Yeah.
I saw her on an interview, and she said, we have to wage jihad in these United States. She said the word jihad. And then, people just kind of created a backlash. She got some blowback. And then she said, whoa, wait a sec. I just mean we have to struggle with our demons.
Yeah.
And we have to, come to terms with our faults in this. No, I don't. Jihad, suicide, but what do you mean? What are you talking about? You're crazy.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of this gaslighting.
For sure, there's systematic gaslighting. Yeah. And we know that the Muslim Brotherhood has cells and branches all over the United States, including on campuses, and they promote and justify and normalize terrorism by Hamas and PIJ. And this is really a threat, to the whole of the West. So
I want to just say one more thing here too. Now, this going back to Brianna Joy Gray and this notion that Israel is responsible somehow for a jihad, right? You had a few years ago, I think maybe it was in 2020, maybe 2021, massive attack, terrorist attack in Sri Lanka by some jihadists. They had backpacks laden with explosives, and there was mass casualties. Now, what is the connection there? What the hell do jihadists in Sri Lanka blowing people up have to do with Israel?
Yeah, of course, the answer is zero.
And there are so many examples.
I was in Sri Lanka, by the way. It's a beautiful country. Very interesting because they also had their own long-standing fight with the Tamil
Tigers, right?
Who actually pioneered the suicide bomb, and it was the Iranians who were inspired, and Hezbollah, the Shiite axis, were inspired by the Tamil Tigers and turned the suicide bomb into a weapon of choice in the Middle East and brought their own religious justification for that. But basically, Joseph, I think the bottom line here is that they're upset by the truce because they never wanted a truce. These forces never wanted a truce. What they wanted to see was Israel defeated, Israel brought to its knees, and by extension, they want to see the West defeated. They want to see the West brought to its knees. They view Israel and nation states and the West as something that needs to be wiped out.
Right.
And that's why I think all of this silence and all of this begrudging, like somebody had their arm twisted, concessions, this isn't the result they wanted. I think that's the bottom line. That's what we're looking at. And it's, it's incredibly disturbing. And what that tells us is that even though the military and strategic gains are massive, and this country today is way safer than it was 2 years ago, culturally, the world is in big trouble. Politically, the world is in big trouble. And we've got forces on the move here, and they're using this conflict as basically just their first jump-off point for an agenda that's truly global. And there are multiple agendas here. It's not just one. We were focusing on the Islamists and how the progressives latch on. I don't even know what the progressives really want. I think they have all kinds of currents within them. And, maybe you have some ideas, but the bottom line from an Israeli perspective is they never wanted a truce. This isn't the result they wanted. They couldn't care less about Palestinian well-being, because if you care about Palestinian well-being, obviously the first thing you want is for Hamas to give the hostages back so that the fighting can end and Palestinians can, start looking at the next day. That would be your priority. I don't think they care about any of that.
Well, they care very much about the resistance narrative, and anybody that observes this region or observes this conflict, really in any capacity, that should be one of the first things they notice, is that there is an inverse relationship between the use of terror and the achievement of Palestinian freedom.
Yeah.
Right? That should be clear to anybody.
Definitely.
So, clearly. And so do they not see this at all?
They don't care.
They don't care.
They don't
right?
care.
All these indications, when you take all of these observations together, and look at them on the table, then it's like what's important for them is they want to see Israel fail.
Yep.
That's the critical piece for them. Okay. Even if it comes at the expense of Palestinian lives, right? So for them to be pro-Palestinian is actually just to be anti-Israel.
100%.
Right? Which is structurally contradictory to to Palestinian well-being
and all their talking points and things that they claim to champion, like human rights, peace, etc., etc. It's all a big lie. Now, let me ask you a political question, Joseph. What is going to happen in New York once Mamdani becomes the mayor? What's the deal there? And what are you seeing? There's a big argument in the Jewish community about are there really large numbers of Jews who are going to vote for this lunatic? Is that the case, or is that being exaggerated? What do you think is going on?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. We can unpack it. So the first thing to say is everybody has a very strong opinion on this. Okay, you go read the New York Times. Mamdani reads, he sounds like some kind of savior, some kind of, up and coming, big shot that's got big plans and shows a lot of promise. That's the vibe you get from New York Times and the New Yorker. Now you read the New York Post. All right, you think, he's a menace. He's going to ruin the city. He's a communist, and only bad things can come.
Yep.
Right. So everybody has a very, very strong opinion. So I want to get the facts on the table first. Okay. Now, I should also admit that I've never been to New York. Okay. I'm not American. Really? No, I've never been to New York. I'm not an American. Okay. I'm not a New Yorker.
If we're doing disclosures, I lived in Westchester County for a period of just over 4 years.
Okay.
As a child, between the ages of 9, when I moved there from Haifa, from Israel.
Okay. Oh, I didn't know. Okay.
Yep. And then from there we moved to London, and then I came back to Israel. But I lived in the tri-state area,
right,
as it is known there, for just over 4 years, but at a very formative point in my life.
Mm-hmm.
It's also basically where I learned most of my English. So I have a connection to the place,
mm-hmm,
but it's kind of old. It's an old connection.
Okay.
It's not a new. And since then, I've been back a few times. New York is an incredible city. I highly recommend to visit for, if you ever get the chance,
mm-hmm,
just to experience, Fifth Avenue. It's a marvel.
Right.
But let's put the disclosures aside,
sure,
and go ahead and please continue.
Yeah. So like I said, everybody has a very strong opinion on it, on Mamdani. Okay. I want to get the facts on the table, before we start opining here. So first fact to take into, I'm going to split it into two. Okay. We have the operational aspects of being the mayor of New York, and then we also have the ideological side of things. Now, let's first talk about the operational aspects of running the city of New York. We're talking about a city of over 8 million people. Okay, mm-hmm, it's bigger than many, many countries. We're talking about a yearly budget of over $100 billion.
Wow.
That's many times bigger the national budget of, for example, Portugal, or Greece. Okay, we're talking about a police force of 30,000.
Mm-hmm.
That's an army.
That's the
30,000 uniformed officers.
That's roughly the size of the Israel police force, not including the border police and other stuff. But that's basically the number of the Israel.
So that's okay. That's big.
Yeah,
it's one of they say. I read that New York's uniformed police force is one of the biggest in the world.
Right.
Then there's ambulance service. Hospitals, ambulance service. I think the biggest sanitation infrastructure in the world or something, or biggest sanitation department. So you're basically running a country,
right?
And think of the job of the mayor, that you have to coordinate with thousands of agencies and organizations. You have to balance political interests and unions and businesses and investors,
right,
and real estate developers. There's so much going on here that you need to be a master of management,
right?
Politics,
economics,
crisis management.
Sure.
Right. You need a very, very diverse.
And in the U.S., the mayors control the police, right?
Yes, and that relationship between the New York mayor and the NYPD is a very, very important one. And think also, it's not just the police. Think of all the security coordination in general. You have all these emergency management systems.
Just to compare it to Israel, by the way, it's very different. The Israel police is under the control of the national police headquarters, not any mayor.
Right.
And, there's a minister for public security, who's very well known and controversial these days, Itamar Ben-Gvir, and even he doesn't control operationally the police.
Right.
Police operationally is controlled by the headquarters in Jerusalem, and then there are districts. Now you have had this thing here in Israel where you've seen the rise of municipal police,
right?
And they're working hand in hand with the Israel police. But still, there's no situation where a mayor or a municipality can start giving the police direct orders. It's they can work, they can encourage that. It's a very different model. So for any Israeli viewers, just so they know, in New York, the mayor and the municipality actually are basically the government, as you say, of a local, almost like a country in terms of the resources involved. And as far as I understand, if I have this correct, they control the police. Now, Mamdani, didn't he say that the police have to be defunded?
Yeah,
also Jews. This is the biggest Jewish city in the world.
Right.
There's no city on earth, including any city in Israel, that has the number of
Jews, right,
that New York has. So, what's going to happen to the Jews of New York?
That's the thing. I just want to read you a quote about the police. That's the thing too. So you have all these insane managerial aspects of managing the global center of commerce.
Right.
And Mamdani is, I don't want to use his age to attack him. That's not what I'm doing. He's 33 years old. It's not because he's young necessarily, but he lacks that experience. He's never had, there's an analysis that that I think the New York Post did on his resume, and he's never, in the past, 10 years or whatever, he hasn't worked more than 3 years cumulatively or something like that, or more than 4 years.
He's extremely privileged.
Yeah, he
comes from a multi-millionaire family.
Exactly. He said he's a Nepo baby.
Right.
Himself. He said that.
Extremely anti-Israel.
Right. So I just want to, we'll get into the ideological.
Yeah.
But operationally here, right, the guy doesn't seem to have the kind of experience profile that you would expect one to have if they're running the global center of commerce, the one of the the biggest cities, and
right. But now, does he identify as a Muslim? Because
yes,
this reporter on I-24 said he's a Shiite Muslim. But
he's Muslim.
One of his parents is not Muslim, right? Unless I have that wrong. I think the mother might.
His dad is Muslim.
Dad is Muslim, which makes him Muslim by religion. And the mother, I'm not 100% sure. But
I'm not sure what the ethnic origin.
I think that she might be Hindu, but I'm not 100%.
Okay. So let me read you a quote talking about the police. So he wrote this on social media at one point. He said, "We don't need an investigation to know that the NYPD is racist, anti-queer, and a major threat to public safety. What we need is to defund the NYPD."
Defund.
Hashtag.
Yeah.
Right. So
what could go wrong?
So that gives you a little bit of insight into how he feels about this.
Is he a communist?
So so this is the thing. Okay. He has all these ideas, and this is one of his strengths. We can also get into, I want to be balanced here. People like him, right? He's shown this very he's skillful, ability to weave together very broad, coalition of supporters in one of the most, demographically and ideologically fragmented cities in the United States.
Right.
He gets a lot of support now. He's very, very, very popular with the progressives, with, center-left people, with lots of different people. He's very popular. Now, if he has some very, very skillful and experienced technocrats with him, maybe he could do a good job. I'm not saying for sure, but he does lack that experience profile that you would expect for somebody to have good operational control.
Sounds like his economic programs, from what I've seen, are pretty crazy.
So the economic programs have these socialist ideas: free healthcare, free childcare, free transportation, stuff like that.
But now, doing that as a city, not as a country, where's the money coming from?
Well, that's the question. Now, one of his ideas that he wants, one of his more radical ideas, when he gets in office, if he gets to office, which is looking more and more likely.
Yeah. When are the elections, by the way?
I'm not exactly sure.
Okay.
I have to check that.
Okay.
But he has, I think he's leading, in polls by a lot.
Cuomo's the rival, right?
Yeah. Andrew Cuomo.
Yeah.
And it's looking like Mamdani's going to win.
Right.
Now, one of his more radical economic ideas is to implement a 4-year rent freeze.
Right.
So you ask, where's that money coming from? Okay, sounds like a nice idea if you're renting an expensive apartment that you can't afford, but are landlords going to just accept that? Are they just gonna absorb?
Doesn't he live
4
in some
years?
crazily, expensive apartment in Midtown or something?
I'm not sure, but that's a good question.
does.
I wouldn't put. I know his parents in I forget the country, but anyway, they have some crazy
His parents are from
mansion.
India.
Yeah, okay, so they have a crazy mansion with like
but there's a Uganda.
Uganda, right,
Indians
exactly.
who immigrated to Uganda, and then
Right, that's the origin.
That's the father, I think.
Right.
The mother may have come straight from India, but I'm not sure. Like,
Okay.
that has to be fact checked.
Fact check these details.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, his family, I think in Uganda they have some crazy mansion with pet monkeys and security and fences. Anyway, so going back to this rent freeze, where's that money going to come from? Who knows? Now, also that we have a historical precedent in New York, right, for thinking that stuff like this might not be such a good idea. If you go back to the 1970s, right, there was this big urban decline. A lot of manufacturing jobs left New York, and a lot of the middle class also left, right? So the city was kind of in decline, and it hit a very low point in 1975 where the city almost went bankrupt. So they had to cut back on a lot of services, a lot of public services, sanitation, all sorts of stuff.
Right.
And it was in a very, very bad shape. One of the results of this urban decline was tons of abandoned buildings.
Right.
Now, because there was all these economic troubles and stuff, a lot of people couldn't pay rent. So the landlords thought, okay, well, why am I paying for the upkeep on this apartment that's not generating any income?
Right.
Math doesn't make sense.
Right.
So they abandoned the buildings. And you had all these abandoned buildings all over New York. You can see pictures. It's incredible.
Right. I think from there, the idea of the broken window policy, was it Giuliani who came up with that? Where if you allow, if you don't tolerate even a broken window, then you can stop the deterioration of an area. By the way, it's a metaphor which I think is good for almost every situation, where if you start tolerating clear signs of a deterioration, you're going to end up in a runaway sort of
you just
snowball.
Get pushed back and back
in
and back and back.
Any context, it's the case. So I don't remember where that comes from, but the thing is, first of all, from an Israeli perspective, I am in favor of national health care. I think this country's this country's health system is fantastic.
Yeah, I agree.
And its capabilities are phenomenal. And what we get for what we pay for, I think, would be hard for a lot of Americans to even comprehend.
Right. Okay. But look,
but we're not talking about a national thing. We're talking about a city. And it's not a country.
This kind of thing requires like massive structural changes and reforms.
It has to be done right.
Yeah.
And the thing that is, it seems to me that he's got a lot of slogans, and he's never, based on what you're saying, it sounds like he's never really encountered reality. He lives in a sort of bubble of slogans and fashionable statements. Now, the problem is that he has become a figurehead for exactly the movement that we were just discussing, the progressive and the Islamists, and he's got all the talking points, and we're going to arrest Bibi if he ever comes to New York. He's very hostile to Israel. He seems to be hostile to the West in general. And so the real thing that's on my mind is, what the hell are the Jews of New York going to do under a guy like this, who's got all the wrong friends, all the wrong talking points? What are they going to do? Now, before you answer, I'm just going to say something, and I've kind of been having this discussion a little bit with an American Jewish friend. I think that American Jews need to step up. I think that they need to hit the streets. I think they need to make themselves heard. I think this whole idea of backdoor influence is no longer really going to work in the long term. And if you look at who has, the clout, who has the influence, it's those that are in the streets. And I think it's time for American Jews, and I know that some of them have been doing this, but really in New York, they have the numbers.
They have 10% of the population.
10%. There's so many of them, right? And they can get organized, start making your voice, start demanding. I saw a video by a rabbi. I think he was a Reform rabbi, basically just pleading with Mamdani. You have to understand. It was just this old school sort of, kind of court Jew kind of, pleading. And people have to understand, our brothers and sisters in the diaspora, I think they have to understand this approach is a failure. You have to start becoming militant in your demands for your rights. And just like everybody else is doing, by the way.
It's a complicated situation because historically, Jews in the diaspora in America, Western countries in particular, have been always aligned with progressives, and they still are. Right? And
they still are.
There's nothing. I mean, Jews have always voted Democrat overwhelmingly.
Yeah.
Voted Democrat. It used to be until this election. I think it used to be something like 90% of Jews vote Democrat. This election, it was 80 something. So all-time low, but still very, very high.
Right.
Right. So Jews Jews have been at the forefront of the civil rights movement. Forefront of all these progressive movements. So,
but that's when progressives were actually progressives.
Yes. So that's
not what they are today.
So that's there's a subset of them that are very, very illiberal and not progressive. I mean, your most hard-boiled anti-Israel activists, when you're calling for a country to be eliminated, which entails mass violence against a minority, that's not a very progressive stance.
Exactly.
No.
And in fact, as my father points out in his, various writings, they have their own sort of, hierarchy in which Jews are at the bottom. It's basically quite aligned with the neo-Nazi kind of hierarchy. So
right.
There's nothing progressive, I think, about the modern progressives. And that's why I think Jews in New York have really got to start thinking outside of the box. I wonder, by the way, Joseph, how many are considering leaving? Do you think that's on their mind?
That's a good question. Probably yes. Just anecdotally, I would say yes. I see people on social media and people I know talking about it all the time. Apparently, also I read an article the other day. There was a report that showed that Aliyah from Western countries is at a 5-year all-time high. I think since 2020. And I know French Jews also, over the past few years have really had it, with France and problems due to immigration and stuff like that. So,
and we haven't even touched today on the far right neo-Nazism.
No. And I just want to say about Mamdani also.
Yeah.
So I laid out taking care of New York, being the mayor of New York is like kind of being the prime minister, president of a country, very powerful country also. That's the operational side. Does he have the experience? No. I just want to lay the facts out. Okay. No, it doesn't seem like he has the experience. Now, the ideological, now you mentioned this too. He is really, you used the word figurehead. Yeah. So he's really, one of the figures now of the anti-Israel, anti-Western movement, right? And he tries to soften the tone. At first, for example, he wouldn't condemn globalize the intifada, the phrase, right? Which people argue, progressives argue means just shaking off or fighting against the oppressor or whatever. But we know what it means, right? It refers to the intifada, which is massacring civilians.
It's again sugarcoating jihad.
Yeah, it's this kind of this gaslighting
and
sugarcoating. So he's wishy-washy on this. At first, he didn't condemn it. And then he said, well, that's not language I would use. And then he said, no, I do condemn it. And then he rolled it back. A lot of inconsistency pertaining to how he feels about that particular phrase, globalized intifada, which has been so prevalent in the last 2 years at anti-Israel protests, that slide into anti-Semitism left, right, and center. So that's one. And look, his dad also, Mahmoud Mamdani.
Yeah. Is he a Columbia professor?
His dad is a Columbia professor, and he's like an anti-nationalist theorist. Now, the term nationalism, right, in the cultural landscape has become kind of a bad word, kind of a nasty word in the past few years, at least since 2016, 2017, at least, right? But it shouldn't, it needn't be, right? Like, this is how the world is organized.
So I would just say, are we talking about nationalists or nation states?
We're talking about the concept of nationalism, that that the world is politically and structurally organized into nation states.
So I'm not sure that that's nationalism.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
You don't think, you'd say that's not nationalism?
Not necessarily.
I think that's the idea behind.
I think that's patriotism or national identification.
Sure.
But I think the Webster Dictionary of nationalism might be a step up from that and feeling like
more ideological.
Not necessarily more ideological, more like some sense of hostility to other nations, right? Which in no way is part of the nation state concept. On the contrary, The idea of nation states, as you say, is recognizing that this is the intrinsic nature of humanity. We're like one big family split up into different nations, and they have their own states usually, not always. And then how to make that work. And it would be incredibly boring if everybody, we wiped out the linguistic, cultural, national, religious identity of humanity. It wouldn't be
also
real.
National borders. I mean, this is the very practical thing that you got to have for security. You got to have demarcation between your country.
Exactly. So, what's the problem with that?
So his dad is like an anti
nation
state.
Okay.
I
think that's right. I'm pretty sure that's right.
So he's like an anti-nation state theorist, professor at Columbia University. So this is
he's coming from where? Where would you place him? Is he in the sort of Marxist camp? Is he in the Islamist camp? Where would you place him?
I don't think he's in the Islamist camp, and this is another thing. No, I think he's in the kind of radical, anti-Western camp. Not necessarily, not Islamist though. I haven't seen any evidence, of jihad sympathy or jihad tendencies or language used of jihad or anything. And this is another criticism that I've seen some people level at Zoran Mamdani himself, that he's an Islamist. I actually don't see any evidence for that.
Interesting.
He's Muslim, but I don't see, when we're talking about Islamism, we're talking about Islam as a governing system, a political system, and not just a religious ideology.
And this is a very interesting point that you're raising, because based on what you're saying publicly, he's not an Islamist, but he seems to have sympathies to Islamists, and I'll break it down quickly.
Yeah, but so do many progressives.
Exactly.
Right.
But the fact that, he is himself a Muslim who has sympathy to Islamists is a sort of, double red flag.
Right.
Of course, not because of the fact that he's Muslim, but when you combine the fact that I'll break it down in a simple way,
sure.
Right? If I was a moderate Muslim, the first thing I would want to do is hit the streets constantly and with the placard saying, not in my name, right? Hamas, not in my name, and Al-Qaeda, not in my name, and ISIS, and the Muslim Brotherhood, and the repression in endless, Muslim systems, and the idea of a caliphate, and jizya, and dhimmi,
religious
apartheid, not in my name. I am here in the West. I accept the West. For me, Islam is a faith, and we want to take it away from the Dark Ages. That's what you would expect a moderate Muslim to do, right? Just like, you get this kind of discourse in other civilizations and religions and cultures. So, but if you have a Muslim political leader in the West who his only comments are globalize the Intifada, says almost nothing I can see that's negative about Hamas. Don't see him criticizing.
He did. I sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah,
he did pretty strongly condemn October 7th.
Okay.
As one must, if they're in any.
Did he condemn it pretty strongly, or was
he condemned it sufficiently,
or was it cosmetic, sort of taking a tea and?
Somewhere in between.
Okay.
Look, he's a very, very good speaker. He's a very good speaker, and he sounds very sincere.
Okay.
And he's very, very articulate. So I didn't perceive.
But he's an anti-Zionist, Joseph. This is the problem.
Yes.
He's an anti-Zionist. So are all the Islamists, right? And so it's not, I heard this, he's not critical of Israeli policy. He's critical of the Jewish nation state's existence.
Which also, and then he says, somebody asked him, do you support Israel's right to exist? He said, no, I don't. But then he went on, he said, but I'm against the whole idea of states having the right to exist in the first place.
We'll start, with the dismantling of all nations. But we'll start with the Jewish state.
Yeah. Also that, and, Israel here, we're a little country surrounded by Muslim
after a Holocaust
nation states also. So, we're okay to dismantle Israel because it's an ethno-state. But, forget about dismantling all these other ethno-states.
More than 50 Muslim countries.
That's a double standard, and that becomes very problematic. It's also where anti-Zionism crosses the line into anti-Semitism, in my opinion.
Interesting. Very interesting.
But I haven't seen any definitive evidence, let's say, that convinces me that he's a real Islamist.
Fair
right?
enough.
I think his Islamist sympathies seem to align more with the kind of radical leftist progressive.
Okay, so you put him in that part of the map, the progressive radical leftists, and not in the Islamist.
Yeah, I don't think. Look.
You've been observing this a lot more.
If somebody, if I see new evidence that comes in, I
believe what you're saying completely. All I'm saying is that because he has a Muslim background, I think that gives it an extra edge, because you would expect really somebody who has a moderate agenda as a Muslim to be even more forthcoming in their condemnation of genocidal Islamist movements throughout the world, let alone here. And here it's not happening. So, okay, now just amazingly, we've already run out of time, which is incredible. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
I feel like we've been talking for 10 minutes.
I know, this has been fantastic. So I'm going to ask you one last thing.
Sure.
Do you think Jews are going to flee New York when he becomes mayor in significant numbers, or are they going to get used to this?
It's a very, very good question. I mean, let's consider for a second, worst case scenarios if he does become mayor. I think what worries people, the most in general is not necessarily, and this also goes for Jews, I think, but I could be wrong. Again, I don't live there, is that he'll run the city into the ground with these socialist policies that will be, shoved down everybody's throat, and the city will just become more crime-ridden, more middle-class flight, all these bad things that lead to urban decline. And within that context, it's very reasonable to assume that Jews will leave. Now, is there going to be an exodus of Jews leaving because there's a massive spike in anti-Semitic attacks because he's mayor? I don't know.
Is that a realistic scenario?
I don't think it's far-fetched. I don't know. We can talk to some people from New York.
That would be a real earthquake.
That would be a real earthquake.
And then the question would be, where would they go?
Right.
And how many would end up maybe in Israel, which is a question that I will leave open. And if our viewers have any opinions about this, then they should feel free to send in their comments. Joseph, we're going to have to wrap it up. This has been fantastic. Thank you so much for being back on the balcony and for another balcony podcast. This is also going to be available on Spotify and in video form. Please help get this podcast out. Share the links. Subscribe to one of the many options. I should be addressing the viewers. I'm still getting used to the new camera setup. We're recording with both a S24 Samsung camera and a new webcam. They're both, I believe, 4K. So hopefully this is going to come out looking good. So if you like what you see, please consider subscribing. You have multiple tiers that you can subscribe to help us keep doing this work. And we really want to get our voices out there. We want to share our perspectives with the world, and you can be a partner in helping us do that. So thanks again, Joseph, and we will catch you next time, hopefully next week.
Sure, looking forward to it.